today to chapters 23 through 26. That's where we're going to be. So go ahead and make sure you've got your book. You are in 23 to 26, so you're ready to follow along with me. And today we're going to focus on something a little bit different. Okay, today we're going to talk about injustice. Now, one of the things that I love about this book, and that's kind of why I'm sad that we're not in the classroom together, but happy that I still get to talk to you through these videos. One of the things that I love about this book is the author tackles this idea of injustice. So it's what we would call a theme. And normally when we talk about theme, I say, what is the theme? And you have to tell me. Well, today I'm telling you what the theme is. And the theme is injustice. And what I'm going to ask you to do today is tell me how Sam, Stanley, and Zero all face injustice in Holes. Now, Sam is not a character that we've met yet. We're going to meet him today. And he faces, out of all of them, the most injustice. But Stanley and Zero both have faced injustice too. So before I can ask you how they faced injustice, it's important for you to understand what injustice is. Injustice is when someone is not treated equally or fairly. They're treated wrong. Okay? Think about our prefix in. We know that in means not, into, opposite of. Justice, when something's done right, it was done just, it was done fairly. So if it's injustice, it's the opposite of justice, right? That means that it was not done right. It was not done fairly. Someone is being treated differently, treated wrong, treated unequally, for a number of reasons. And so down here I wrote some of the causes for injustice. And we're going to see not all of these, but some of these in our reading today. So one of the causes of injustice is gender. What that means is boy or a girl. And girls, we've spent a lot of time talking about that, especially when we did our ancient Greek unit. And we talked about how a lot of times girls weren't allowed to go to school. We were treated differently because we were females. We weren't allowed to learn how to read or how to write. Okay, we were treated very differently because of our gender. Race. That's also something we've talked about. And I know in 3rd grade you did a study on Rosa Parks. We talked about it too, and some of you did our Who Was Museum. Treated differently because the color of your skin. And we know, again, these are all unjust, right? We know these are not right. Your background, your history, where you come from. Okay, some people don't like the way you come from, the way you dress, the way you talk, and so they treat you differently, and it's not right. Your culture, the things that you believe in, they treat you differently because you believe in different things that they believe in, or you practice different traditions than they do, and so they treat you differently. Or being accused unfairly. Think about it like on the playground. Someone runs up to me and they're like, Miss Megan, let's use Jaylee. Okay, we're gonna pick on her a little bit. We'll use her as an example. You know, Jaylee hit me, and maybe Jaylee didn't do it at all, right? She's being accused unfairly. That's her having to face injustice, being accused unfairly. Okay, so knowing what injustice is, giving you some examples. Our essential question for today is going to be, how does Sam, Stanley, and Zero all face injustice in Holes? And you notice Holes is capitalized. There is an underline because when it is a proper noun, it is capitalized, and we underline the titles of books. Okay, so let's dig in. We are on chapter 23. I'm on page 101. We are about halfway through the book, guys. When we finish today, we will be almost dead center halfway through the book. So y'all are doing great. I'm so proud of you for working even though we're not together in class. And remember, this is kind of a difficult concept today. So if you have questions, please let me know. All right, I'm on page 101, chapter 23. 110 years ago, Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring, when the peach trees, which lined the shore, bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There was always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They played games, dance, sing, and swim in the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded for the best peach pie and peach jam. A special prize was given every year to Miss Catherine Barlow for her fabulous spiced peaches. No one else tried to make spiced peaches because they knew none could be as delicious as hers. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick bushels of peaches and preserved them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other spices that she kept secret. The jarred peaches would last all winter. They probably would have lasted a lot longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of winter. It was said that Green Lake was heaven on earth, and that Miss Catherine's spiced peaches were food for the angels. Catherine Barlow was the town's only school teacher. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse. It was old, even then. The roof leaked, the windows wouldn't open, the door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and full of life. The children loved her. Okay, so remember, kiddos, we are looking at Green Lake, except back then it wasn't called Camp Green Lake. It was just Green Lake. Okay, we're 110 years ago in the past, and we're talking about Miss Catherine Barlow. Where have you heard the name Barlow? Where have you heard maybe another version of Catherine? Okay, so who do you think this story that the author is going back in time and telling us, who is it focusing on? I'm in the middle of 102. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many of the adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. But all they ever got was an education. One such young man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of dead fish. That wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incurable foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that 110 years later would afflict the famous ball player Clyde Livingston. Remember, Clyde's Sweet Feet Livingston are the shoes that Stanley was accused of stealing. But at least Clyde Livingston showered every day. I take a bath every Sunday morning, Trout would brag, whether I need to or not. So this kiddo showers 1 time a week. Most everyone in the town of Camp Green Lake expected Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the county. His family owned most of the peach trees and all the land on the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night school but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He was loud and stupid. A lot of men in town were not educated. That didn't bother Miss Catherine. She knew they'd spent most of their lives working on farms or ranches and hadn't had much schooling. And that's why she was there, to teach them. Okay, kiddos, so 110 years ago, school looked a lot different than what it does today. And like she said, you lived in a little town, like the town that we live in now, a lot of us would have never gone to school because we would have been too busy working on farms. Okay, so Miss Catherine was there to teach them how to read and write and do math, even though they were adults. But Trout didn't want to learn. He seemed to be proud of his stupidity. "How'd you like to take a ride on my new boat this Saturday?" he asked her one evening after class. "No, thank you," said Miss Catherine. "We've got a brand new boat," he said. "You don't even have to row it." "Yes, I know," said Miss Catherine. Everyone in town had seen and heard the Walkers' new boat. It made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke all over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he ever wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine had turned him down. He pointed his finger at her and said, "No one ever says no to Charles Walker." "I believe I just did," said Catherine Barlow. All right, kiddos, I'm on the top of 24. But I see that the first word here is Stanley. I'm going back to talk about Stanley. So why do you think the author went back 110 years ago to tell me a story about Miss Catherine? I want you to kind of keep that in your head, okay? Stanley was half asleep as he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. Remember, the last time we read, the warden had struck Mr. Sir in the face with her rattlesnake venom fingernails, and he blamed it all on Stanley, because Stanley claimed, remember, he was accused, he didn't do it, but he took the rap for it, of stealing the sunflower seeds. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of half a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running down his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice in a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eyes down and hardly breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into a bowl. He brought his tray to the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Sir holding the boy's head against the oatmeal pot. "Something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak but couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. "Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" asked Mr. Sir as he continued to choke the boy. Nobody said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. His head banged against the table as he fell to the ground. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, "How does my face look to you now?" A gurgling sound came out of the boy's mouth. Then he managed to grasp the word, "Fine." "I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." "What kind of man is Mr. Sir?" "Not a very nice one." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he just shrugged and dug his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard and as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. "Whenever you're ready, just let me know," Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except, "Thank you, Mr. Sir," as he filled each canteen. No one even dared to look at his grotesque face. What do you think grotesque means? Think about what his face looks like. Probably means disgusting, right? As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry and as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected off the mirror of the truck. Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet as he took his canteen from him. "You thirsty, caveman?" Mr. Sir asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said, handing his canteen to him. Mr. Sir opened the nozzle, and the water flowed out of the tank, but it did not go into Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds, then stopped. "You want more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour into the dirt. "There, that should be plenty." He handed Stanley his empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir." Why is Mr. Sir doing that to Stanley? Probably because Mr. Sir blames Stanley for having the 3 scratches on his face, right? Chapter 25, page 107. There was a doctor in the town of Green Lake 110 years ago. Okay, so I'm going back in time again. Okay, the author's taking us back to what Green Lake looked like 110 years ago. His name was Dr. Hawthorne, and whenever people got sick, they would go see Doc Hawthorne. But they would also see Sam, the Onion Man. Now remember, that's one of our questions, Sam. Okay, so start paying attention to him. "Onions, sweet fresh onions," Sam would call, as he and his donkey, Mary Lou, walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week, he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big, strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and another day for him to return. Most of the time, he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use at no charge. But sometimes he would take Mary Lou on his boat with him. Can you imagine a donkey on a boat? Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. "She eats nothing but raw onions," Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. "It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old." Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would he know? Still, nobody ever argued with Sam, and whenever they were sick, they would go not only to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave them the same advice: eat plenty of onions. He said that onions were good for the digestion, the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, and the brain. If you don't believe me, just look at old Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also had many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and pastes, all made out of onion juice in different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma. That one was for warts and pimples. Another was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment which he claimed would cure baldness. It's when someone's bald, right? They have no hair. Just rub it on your husband's head every night when he's sleeping, Miss Collin would, and soon his hair will be as thick and as long as Mary Lou's tail. Doc Hawthorne did not resent Sam. That means, wasn't mad at Sam. Didn't get mad that even though he was the doctor, they were still going to Sam for treatment, right? The folks at Green Lake were afraid to take chances. They would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. After they got over their illness, no one could be sure, not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost completely bald, and in the mornings, his head smelled like onions. So that means Doc Hawthorne probably bought the onion stuff for baldness, right? When Catherine Barlow, our two stories are connecting. When Catherine Barlow bought onions, she always bought an extra one or two and would let Mary Lou eat them out of her hand. Is something wrong? Sam asked her one day as she was feeding Mary Lou. You seem distracted. Oh, just the weather, said Miss Catherine. It looks like rain clouds moving in. Me and Mary Lou, we like the rain, said Sam. Oh, I like it fine, said Miss Catherine, and she rubbed the donkey's rough hair on top of its head. It's just that the roof leaks in the schoolhouse. I can fix that, said Sam. What are you going to do? Catherine joked. Fill the holes with onion paste? Sam laughed. I'm pretty good with my hands, he told her. I built my own boat. If it leaked, I'd be in big trouble. Catherine couldn't help but notice his strong, firm hands. They made a deal. He agreed to fix the leaky roof in exchange for 6 jars of spiced peaches. It took Sam a week to fix the roof because he could only work in the afternoons after school let out and before night classes began. Sam wasn't allowed to attend classes. Okay, kiddos, I'm going to say a word here and I don't want you to freak out because I'm going to explain it, okay? Sam wasn't allowed to attend classes because he was a Negro, but they let him fix the building. Now, that is not a word that we use anymore. Okay, it was a word to describe somebody of African American descent, okay? Their skin was black. But you have to understand that the author is wanting us to know what it was like 110 years ago. And 110 years ago, kiddos, that's when those laws were still in place, that black and whites couldn't go to school together, they couldn't eat in the same restaurants, okay? That slavery wasn't far from being ended. I mean, it had already ended, but it hadn't ended that long ago, okay? Just 30 or 40 years before then. And so there was still a lot of tension between those who were white and those who were black. And so this is not a word we need to use. It's not a word that we need to, it's not a bad word. It's just a word that brings up a lot of negative feelings. But the author uses this word not to be ugly, and not because the author thinks that because Sam has a different color skin, he should be treated differently. It's because the author wants us to understand how people thought back then. Does that make sense? And if it doesn't, please feel free to reach out to me, okay? Because I would love to have that conversation with you. So Sam wasn't allowed to go to school, right? Okay, just because he was African American. He was not allowed to go to school. But in Miss Catherine's eyes, she didn't treat him any differently, right? She treated him completely equal. Miss Catherine usually stayed in the schoolhouse, grading papers and such, while Sam worked on the roof. She enjoyed what little conversation they were able to have, shouting up and down at each other. She was surprised by his interest in poetry. When he took a break, she would sometimes read a poem to him. On more than one occasion, she would start to read a poem by Poe or Longfellow, only to hear him finish it for her from memory. So even though he wasn't allowed to go to school, he wasn't allowed to learn how to read or write, he still was able to memorize poems. And that tells us that Sam was a pretty smart guy. I'm on the top of 110, kiddos. She was sad when the roof was finished. Is something wrong? He asked. No, you did a wonderful job, she said. It's just that the windows won't open. The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then. I can fix that, said Sam. She gave him 2 more jars of peaches, and Sam fixed the windows. It was easier to talk to him when he was working on the windows. He told her about his secret onion field on the other side of the lake, where the onions grow all year round and the water runs uphill. When the windows were fixed, she complained that her desk wobbled. I can fix that, said Sam. The next time she saw him, she mentioned that the door doesn't hang straight, and she got to spend another afternoon with him while he fixed the door. By the end of the first semester, Onion Sam had turned the old run-down schoolhouse into a well-crafted, freshly painted jewel of a building that the whole town was proud of. People passing by would stop and admire it. That's our schoolhouse. It shows how much we value education here in Greentown. The only people who weren't happy with it was Miss Catherine. She'd run out of things that needed to be fixed. She sat at her desk one afternoon listening to the pitter-patter of the rain on the roof. No water leaked into the classroom except for the few drops that came from her eyes. Means Miss Catherine was crying, right? Onions! Hot, sweet onions! Sam called out on the street. She ran to him. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she hugged Mary Lou's neck. Is something wrong? He asked her. Oh, Sam, she said, my heart is breaking. I can fix that, said Sam, and she turned to him. He took both of her hands and kissed her. Because of the rain, there was nobody else out in the street, and even if there was, Catherine and Sam wouldn't have noticed. They were lost in their own world. At that moment, however, Hattie Parker stepped out of the general store, like the little grocery store. They didn't see her, but she saw them. She pointed her quivering finger in their direction and whispered, God will punish you. Now, kiddos, I want you to understand